welcome to the first of these video interviews that I'll be conducting with our candidates here at Hydrogen. So a brief piece of background on myself. My name's Nick. I am a senior consultant on our offshore legal team here, focusing primarily on placing qualified lawyers into all of the key locations that we cover, those being the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, Bermuda and the UK Channel Islands. I'm joined today by Shayla, who was a candidate that we successfully placed into Walkers in Bermuda. I thought that it'd be really useful to conduct these interviews to give potential candidates a little bit more information about the realities of making the move offshore, what attracted them to the move, and how they found the experience so far. I will now pass over to Shayla, who can give you a bit of background on herself, yeah, we can hear a little bit more about her background prior to making the move over to Bermuda.
Great. Thanks, Nick. I'm so excited to be talking to everyone today because I can honestly say the best decision I ever made in my entire life was going offshore. I work less hours for better compensation, and you really can't beat having a tan all the time. And it's wonderful. So I may not be your typical candidate in that I have actively been looking to go offshore for quite a few years. So some people may just respond to a recruiter prompt and make a big life choice out of the blue. It was a little more structured for me and a little more deliberate. But that doesn't make the experience any less amazing for those who decide to do it spontaneously. But I don't know where we should begin, but I have nothing but good things to say.
Brilliant, always good to hear. Well, in terms of your initial attraction to the offshore market, Shayla, would you mind just talking us through what first interested you both from a personal and a professional standpoint?
Certainly. Well, at the risk of sounding a little mercenary, one of the biggest allures is, of course, the compensation and the tax neutrality. So for myself, coming from Canada, and specifically one of the most highly taxed provinces in Canada, as someone with student loans, it's tough to kind of get going, to get into the black in your life. So regardless of how high your income is, if you're saddled with student loans while paying really high income tax, it's tough. It's really tough. So from a very strategic fiscal point of view, I wanted to kickstart my life. I wanted to get going. I wanted to get out of debt. So that's a huge motivation, won't deny. Another aspect of it is, of course, the exoticness of going offshore, somewhere new, living on an island. I mean, when I told my family I'm moving to Bermuda, they're like, I don't even know where that is. So it's exciting, right? It's a challenge. It's a new culture. It's new people. And I've never been one to shy away from a new challenge. So I think those are the primary motivators. And another huge part professionally is I know that offshore is where a lot of the best business happens. So anybody who is looking to strategically invest or to do something big usually necessarily has an offshore component to it. I deal with New York, London, Toronto, Hong Kong. I mean, all over the place, all the time.
Perfect. And how would you say that you found the transition to working offshore, having come from a more traditional onshore practice?
The transition to offshore was a little different than I expected. One, I'm so used to being stressed out all the time. The frantic nature of the Toronto, New York corporate lawyer lifestyle, it was tough for me to deprogram being stressed. So when I didn't get emails at night or on the weekends, I started to wonder, oh, is my internet working? And it took a while for me to get into the island mindset where, no, you're not getting emails at all hours of the night and weekend because the partners aren't working either. They're leading by example. And it's just a different approach to work here. People value their time off. And if they value their time off, they value your time off. So that was an interesting adjustment, which after some, I don't know, paranoia, I'm settling into it quite nicely. But in terms of the actual practice, the work that I do, the biggest transition would be from a transactional perspective. So onshore, I was used to being, for lack of a better phrase, the bus driver. I was driving the bus of the transaction. I was coordinating everything. I was organizing external counsel, doing the primary drafting, that sort of thing. But when you're offshore, generally you are just one small component of a much larger transaction, and the bus is being driven by onshore counsel, by New York, Toronto, London. So it's kind of nice in that you're just a player as opposed to the captain who is calling all the shots. So it's a lower level of stress, and you're doing a lot more discrete, smaller components as opposed to coordinating large scale transactions. So the control freak in me is adjusting to that, but it's a nicer pace for sure.
Brilliant. And what sort of support would you say has been made available to you since making the move offshore, and what's your experience been of those sort of resources?
Well, when you go offshore to a very small island such as Bermuda, you need to go with your eyes wide open, realizing that the infrastructure is not the same as it is in a big city. There are delays, things move more slowly, and you have to have patience to get things done, like setting up a bank account. I mean, my work permit took quite a bit of time. Thank you, COVID. Um, but I had lots of resources in the firm. So the HR department of my firm was very, very helpful. They were making phone calls and following up as needed. The partners who I work primarily for were very supportive. And the best thing is, everyone understands those delays. So everyone knows it's not your fault. It's very welcoming, it's very patient. And overall, just the kindness and the welcoming feeling of the firm has been the biggest resource, making sure that I'm socially integrated, asking me if I needed groceries. Well, for example, when I first arrived, we had to quarantine because we were height of the pandemic, and my law firm made sure to have groceries delivered to the hotel room to make sure that, you know, I had my favorite foods while I was stuck in the room. So it's been great.
And from sort of a training and upskilling perspective, how would you say that the firm have kind of supported you through that since making the move offshore?
Well, I did have a bit of an advantage in that a huge part of my job here is in the digital asset and crypto asset space. So I knew more than some of the people coming in, which was very helpful because I mean, those skills are completely transferable. But Bermuda, like Cayman, is a common law jurisdiction. So we all have a similar foundation, but the training, it's a little steep, the learning curve, because you think you know something, but you don't know what you don't know until you know it. So there's a lot of legislation here that you have to get familiar with. And like any other, I presume, any other offshore jurisdiction, it's very highly regulated. So there is a lot of protocol when it comes to anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism financing, those sorts of things. So I had to revert back to being a student again in terms of getting used to doing research and reading the law, like really knowing the law. And in a traditional transactional practice in Canada, you're not really going back to the Corporations Act all that often. So it was an interesting exercise to be a student again, essentially. And I think the most important thing to have when you're going through this transition is a big, healthy dose of humility. You have to come in ready to learn, ready to humble yourself because you are starting from zero. And notwithstanding the fact that my title is senior associate, you have to start as a humble student. So it doesn't take long to get up and running, but you need to be ready for that adjustment, I think.
Absolutely. How would you say that you've found life on Bermuda?
I love Bermuda. I really love it here. I won't go on and on about the pink sand beaches or the weather. I mean, that's obvious. You can Google search the images. It's just pristine and amazing. But one thing I like about Bermuda, it reminds me of small town Canada in that everyone is welcoming. You can very easily find yourself at a stranger's house for dinner. You meet people on the street. Everyone says good morning when you step onto the public bus. And it's just a happy atmosphere. I think because the pace is so much more laid back, people are generally more cheerful. And walking down the downtown strip in Bermuda is very different from walking downtown London or New York. It's everyone's happy to see you. It's really wonderful. It sounds cheesy, I know, but I mean, somebody actually said to me, "Have a Bermudaful day" at the store yesterday.
I've not heard that one yet.
It's fabulous. So it's really great. It's a fun culture. It's the only challenge I would say would be your supply chain because you are a smaller island. You have to import a lot of things. So you can't always find your favorite snack or your favorite hair product. It just may not be available. And because of that, it's more expensive. But I think that's a given with any kind of an island situation.
Yeah, of course. So thank you for kind of starting to touch on that a bit there, Shayla. But I wondered if you could kind of give us just sort of for ease for someone kind of looking into a move offshore, what would you say have been and who might be interested in Bermuda? What would you say have been kind of the main pros and cons of work and life since moving over to the island?
Certainly. Well, before you make a jump to somewhere like Bermuda, I would highly, strongly recommend doing your research, learning about the internet speeds, what cell phone cell phone protocol is available, because it's not Canada, it's not the UK, it's different, and you can't get things here that you could get elsewhere. And really be prepared for the cost of living. Yes, your salary is higher, but the cost of living is proportionately also quite high. So even though your salary may increase in numbers, you really have to take into consideration the cost of things, your electricity, your water, your food. So just come in with your eyes open. And I'm somebody who likes spreadsheets, so I had my budget analysis all ready to go. Just be aware of that. As I mentioned earlier, a big con is just things are slow. You can't be helped. People are more laid back, and people are the ones pulling the strings and pushing the buttons for getting anything done in terms of immigration or government or getting a bank account set up, for example. So patience, it'll get done. Maybe not as fast as it would onshore, but it'll get done. One thing I miss, there's no ice. There's no ice rink. Like there's nowhere to play hockey. There's nowhere to go skating. So to my fellow Canadians who really value that, that's a big con on Bermuda. But there is a ball hockey rink 100 feet from my house. So there's something. What else?
Would you like to just give us a few pros?
Certainly. Well, as I mentioned before, the double-edged sword of the laid-back approach. So yeah, things happen a bit more slowly, but you also don't have people yelling at you or stressing you out. Everyone's just doing their thing and moving along, and that translates into a much less stressful work environment, with the exception of, your onshore clients who just are who they are all the time. But generally speaking, I like that my cortisol levels are lower. And for my own well-being, my own personal health, I have lost weight since I've come here. I'm sleeping better. I'm just generally happier with my work-life balance. And the fact that it's sunny and I'm not in the dark in 6 feet of snow in the wintertime is always beneficial for your health. And I've noticed it in my partner as well, who has had some health problems. And since we've come here, everything is better. He's healthier. We're both living a much more healthy lifestyle because we're not driving all the time. We're walking, we're outside, we're swimming. It's just a great way to live.
So pleased to hear that. And just sort of, I know we kind of mentioned a little bit earlier about sort of the work permit process, but I wondered if you could just kind of give us your insights as a candidate who's been through this process, how you found the process from kind of start to finish, touching on the interview process, the work permit and visas, and finally sort of the physical relocation to Bermuda.
Certainly. Well, I'll start at the very beginning. I had a really hard time getting the attention of offshore firms. And I felt like I was sending applications into these black holes with these portals with the firms, and I just nothing was happening. And it was very frustrating at the start trying to even get someone to look at my resume. And it wasn't until I connected with you guys at Hydrogen that suddenly I was getting phone calls and emails and people were interested in me. So the biggest challenge offshore, I think, is getting on their radar. And so having a recruitment agency who has those relationships in place is super beneficial, because I just couldn't do it on my own. And it was very frustrating. But once we did get the interviews in place and we started interviewing with a bunch of different firms in Cayman and Bermuda, it moved very quickly. I think we had interviews one week and a second interview the next week. And next thing you know, there's offers on the table and we're discussing, negotiating. So that part was pretty straightforward. The interview process was not difficult. I mean, they weren't asking complicated questions. It was more trying to see if you were a good fit. And I got the vibe early on, particularly with Walkers, where I ended up, that they had already been sold on me after looking at my resume. And this was just a weirdo check to make sure that I was who I seemed to be. And once I got my foot in the door, everything just started to flow. And the time from first interview to offer in hand was quite short. I think it was less than a month. It was a couple of weeks. But in my particular situation, in the throes of the pandemic, the work permit process was problematic. I think it was 6 or 7 months from accepting the offer to finally landing on the island. And I'm told that this is not normal. This was because, immigration staff were working from home and things were moving very slowly. So it was a bit of an anomaly there. But I had people on the ground at my firm, and they had another employment agency assisting, trying to get my work permit pushed through, helping me navigate the process to get all of my paperwork involved. Oh yeah, pro tip, don't ever send things by regular mail. Always send it by a courier, FedEx or DHL, because my first package just never got there. So lesson learned, FedEx. So apart from that delay, once everything was settled, it was fine. And when I finally did land, my work permit was issued with the wrong name. So we had to fix that. But this was, I don't know, it's got to be random, or maybe it's not. These were some of the challenges I dealt with, but it wasn't that big a deal. Once I was here, it was just a matter of getting things reprinted and it was fine. So apart from the delay, the process wasn't too bad. One thing to be aware of when you're trying to go offshore is places like Bermuda and Cayman. I'm not sure about the other jurisdictions, but those two for sure. There's protocols in place put in by the government to protect locals. So you have to, the employers, in order to get a work permit for you, they have to show that no Bermudian or no person from Cayman can do the job. So that's the whole process. I mean, the firm wanting you isn't always enough. They have to follow the government guidelines to protect the local people of that country. So I think sometimes that's why there's a bit of a delay. So it's with any country. Take care of your own.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And in terms of kind of what you did to settle into island life, Shayla, how did you sort of go about assimilating into life in Bermuda?
Well, it's not hard to assimilate into life in Bermuda. You just walk around with a smile and you're assimilated. It's easy. But in terms of the day-to-day, I think there are two ways to approach an international move like this. One is to liquidate your life, sell everything you own, and go with a couple of suitcases. That's one approach. Start over, get everything new, and start building when you land. Approach number two is what we opted for. A bit more of a ballsy move. We loaded up a 20-foot sea can and bought everything we thought we might need and shipped it. So our reasoning there was because of the supply chain issue and how expensive things are here. We thought if we paid these costs up front, that kind of front loaded it, then over the long run, it would end up being cheaper because we're not paying island prices for a couch. So that's what we did. That approach is far more tricky. It involves a bit of gambling. because you have to have an idea of where you're going to live, and you have to be pretty darn sure about your choice. So having shipped, I mean, we brought all this stuff here. So having shipped everything, I can't just go back to Canada next week. Like, I invested in Bermuda, I invested in this job, and I'm planning on being here for the long haul. So if you're a bit more uncertain, probably approach number one is the way to go. And also depending where you are in your life. I've been with my partner for some time, and we've been nesting and we've been accumulating stuff. So it made sense for us. But if you're earlier in your career, or maybe single, or don't have a lot of things, liquidate, start fresh, get a furnished place.
And how have you found settling into social life in Bermuda? Could you tell us a little bit about any clubs that you've joined, or what kind of the or what the firm social life is like?
Certainly. Well, things are just starting to get social again because we're just finally allowed to start doing things again with the world starting to open up. And with the COVID restrictions lessening, we have a summer social underway. So the firm is debating between a private mini island or a catamaran booze cruise for the summer social. Once a month, we have on a Friday night what we call wine time, where the whole firm, from assistants to managing partner, gets together for some wine and we have a good time and get together. I'm an avid golfer. There are beautiful, beautiful golf courses on the island of Bermuda. So some of my colleagues, every couple of weeks, we go out for 9 or 18 holes. And in terms of clubs, I actually joined the Bermuda national volleyball team, which is amazing. I was a very, very competitive volleyball player in university and in the last few years. But because the island is a bit smaller and there just aren't that many people, I was able to, in my 30s, join the team, which is phenomenal because it's like getting a second chance at being a high level athlete. And what's really great is my firm fully supports this endeavor. They don't see it as a competing stretch on my time. They think it's amazing. They want me to promote it on LinkedIn. They're looking at sponsorship opportunities, and they're giving me time off to travel to Olympic qualifying events, which is so amazing. So I'm having a great time. And in terms of my social life, obviously that the volleyball team is becoming a huge part of my social circle, and those girls are quickly becoming my besties. And I also find that cross firms, so not just within Walkers, but also at Appleby and Conyers and Carey Olsen, there's a lot of collegiality. So there aren't formal events as far as I know, although I've been chatting with a senior counsel at Carey Olsen trying to get something put together. But everybody knows everybody. It's a small place. So you can be at happy hour at a pub, 5 o'clock on a Thursday, see somebody from another firm, join their table. It's a very fun social island, I would say.
Well, look, thank you so much for that comprehensive overview of of life in Bermuda and how you found the whole process, Shayla. I think that's all really useful for anybody potentially exploring a move. Just before we let you go, could you leave us with some top tips for someone looking to make that move from your perspective as a recent joiner to Walkers?
Certainly. As I mentioned before, do your research. That's step one. It sounds basic, but really do your research. If you can, go to the island before, like get there, take a look at the commute you might have to deal with, the type of crackers that are available. Maybe you can't find your favorite cracker. And if you can get an ally on the island, I think that would be a wonderful help. I was lucky enough to connect with some colleagues at Walkers before arriving. So, for example, my buddy, my colleague at the firm, he was able to liaise with a real estate agent and check out the home we're in now before we landed. So we were able to have a home organized for when we got here, which was unbelievably helpful to know that we had a place to live. And apart from that, at the risk of sounding a little bit cheesy, I'd say try to be fearless. Like, come in with an open mind. Don't be afraid of something just because it's different, and embrace the change. after moving here, talking to friends and family, everyone is so jealous. I said, oh my goodness, like, I can't believe you live there. And why doesn't everybody move there? We'll tell you why everybody doesn't go offshore, because they're afraid. They're afraid of new things. They're afraid of being far from family. People don't like change. So don't be afraid of the change. Your life will absolutely improve for the better. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time, Shayla. Anyone wishing to have a confidential discussion around opportunities in Bermuda, Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, or the UK Channel Islands, please get in touch with myself or another member of the offshore team here at Hydrogen, and we'd be more than happy to talk you through the opportunities at your level.